Welcome to Facebook Live. I'm Senator Ben Cardin. I thank you for joining me on this regular broadcast that we do on Facebook Live in order to get experts on a particularly timely subject before you so that you can hear about an issue of great interest, have a chance to ask questions, and really have an informative discussions. So I'm very pleased that today we're going to talk about the United States Postal Service. An issue, quite frankly, I get as many constituent letters about as any subject. They're not letters anymore. There could be letters, there could be emails, it could be phone, messaging. It's an issue that comes up frequently. A lot of floor debate on it in the United States Senate. We know that it's been controversial with the Trump administration, and it is an area of great personal interest to all Americans. I'm glad that we have Jim Sauber with me today, who's the Chief of Staff for the National Association of Letter Carriers, and Courtney Jenkins, who's the Legislative Director of American Postal Workers Union Local 181. I want to start by saying thank you. Thank you to my two guests for the frontline workers that they represent, that are out there doing their job every day under extremely challenging conditions before COVID-19. And now with COVID-19, they are clearly our frontline workers, our heroes. So first and foremost, I want to thank them through you for their service to our community and what they do every day. I want to give each of you an opportunity to make some opening remarks as to how literally things are on the ground as it relates to the U.S. Postal Service. But I just want to start with a couple observations. The Universal Postal Service is a commitment that was made since the founding of our country. It's embedded in the Constitution of the United States. Article 1, Section 8, the Congress shall have the power to establish post offices and post roads. It's a constitutional responsibility for Congress to make sure that we have a postal system and that we have universal service. The Post Office Department was established in 1792. So it is a part of the creation of our country, and it's a critical part of our country. Universal service is something we can never take for granted. It connects communities and individuals throughout our country and every type of community, but particularly those who live in rural America. The Postal Service is a lifeline for connection to family, to business, to commerce. It's a critical part of what Americans depend upon. And we've had the best postal service in the world in the United States, and we're proud of that. It's particularly important for delivery of commerce. Legal documents depend upon the reliable service of the postal system. And their record has always been outstanding on delivery. When we think about that, we drop off a letter in a mailbox, and in most cases, within a day or two, it's at its destination. And we recognize that there's been billions of letters filed every day in this country. The number of 143 billion pieces of mail in 2019 delivered. And it's critically important for healthcare. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from particularly my seniors about their concern on getting their prescription medicines. So you see, 20% of people over 40 years of age get their prescription medicines solely through the Postal Service. In many cases, their healthcare plan demands that they get their prescription drugs through the postal system. And then, of course, the issue that has come up of late with this pandemic, that the CDC has suggested that it is safer for you to vote other than in person on Election Day on November 3rd, so that it is encouraged for you to use the mail-in ballots. In the state of Maryland, we have a very simple process for applying for an absentee ballot and mailing it in or dropping it off at a collection spot before Election Day. And the concern is, will the Postal Service have the resources, or will there be deliberative efforts made to deny the timely delivery of mail to protect our democratic institution of free and fair elections? These are all issues that have come up in recent weeks. Some discussions I thought we would really never have, because they should not be partisan discussions. So with that, let me first turn it over to Jim Sauber to give us a view from the national letter carriers as to how the situation is today, and then I'll turn it over to Courtney Jenkins.
Thank you, Senator. It's really a pleasure to be here as a Marylander. It's an honor as well. I represent a union that has 211,000 active letter carriers, and the men and women of the Postal Service, and not just in the letter carriers, but all the different types of employees, are incredibly proud of the service we provide to the country, particularly during this pandemic. We've been delivering Christmas levels of packages over the last 25 weeks as people have worked from home and sheltered in place during this pandemic. We've delivered, IRS relief checks. We've delivered CDC information ballots. We've done the census. As you mentioned, in the long history of the Postal Service, we're embedded in our democratic system, and nothing is more important than our role in the election system. And even before the pandemic, the Postal Service has been vital for our elections for decades. Most election boards use the Postal Service in a whole variety of ways for voter registration, for notifications of polling places, for sample ballots, for information on referenda. We're ingrained in our democratic system. In 2016, 1 out of every 4 ballots cast in America was on a mailed out ballot. So even before the pandemic, we were essential. And what we saw this year during the primaries is that more than 50% of all ballots cast were on mailed in ballots. So we take our responsibility very, very seriously. We've been very troubled by the controversies that we had earlier this summer with the service cuts and the new Postmaster General. I think I want Marylanders to know that the unions are the eyes and ears of the American citizens, and we're on the inside, and we will certainly blow the whistle on any attempts to interfere with the smooth running of this election. Thanks to the public uproar, many of the service cuts that were announced have been rolled back. The unions now have a formal role in the National Election Task Force. We've been meeting on a weekly basis. And I guess I just really want to assure, because unfortunately the president has been out there not only spreading misinformation about the safety of mail ballots, but openly questioning the Postal Service's ability to handle the surge, this increased use of mail ballots. And nothing could be further from the truth. It's an incredibly safe way to vote, and we certainly have the capacity. On a typical day before the pandemic, we delivered 500 million pieces of mail a day. Now, because of the recession, we're probably down to about 400 million pieces of mail a day, but we have the exact same capacity. We have the same capacity we had at Christmas time when we delivered 750 million pieces of mail a day. So we can certainly flex up and handle any increase in the delivery of ballots, and we look forward to doing that. Our goal in the task force is to make sure that every ballot gets delivered and every ballot gets counted. And that means getting a postmark on every envelope and making sure that we do everything we can humanly possible to make sure every American has the right to vote. And so it's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Well, thank you. And Jim, I just want to underscore the voting by mail, because the applications are available. You can do an application until I think it's the 3rd week in October. We urge you to file your applications immediately if you're going to vote by mail. If you're going to get an absentee ballot, do that immediately. You get it in Maryland through the state election board. You return it to your local election board. They will acknowledge it so that you'll know that they have received your application for an absentee ballot. They'll give you a link where you can check its status. You will be getting the actual physical ballot to where you asked for it to be mailed to. And you should be getting that in early October. And then you can return that by U.S. mail, and they'll track it for you. So you can look on your link to know when that ballot has been received and when it's been tabulated. So you'll be able to get all of that information so you can vote safely and conveniently by mail in Maryland, and you can rest assured that you'll be able to verify that your vote has been received. So just urge people to do this early. Don't wait to the deadline, because at the deadline, obviously, there's going to be a lot of activity, and you may not get the same timely update that you could get if you do this early. So please request your absentee ballot. Whenever you receive it, return it as quickly as possible, and you confirm, if you wish, through the link that the local election board will be giving to you. Courtney, give us give me how the morale is among the postal workers during this period of time. Obviously, it's been a challenge. There's been, even before COVID-19, you were being asked to do more with less. There was a lot of legacy costs that the way they were funding it was a way that didn't allow for the best efficiencies of the budget. Now that through COVID-19, it's been made more challenging, and I'm going to get to Mr. DeJoy soon. I want to ask a couple questions specifically about him, but just give me how you see it from the postal workers.
Well, thank you, Senator Carr, for having us. On behalf of Local President McKnight and the 1,500 postal clerks, motor vehicle service persons, and maintenance personnel at the post office in the Baltimore area, we again thank you for your support. Morale has gone up recently, and that's thanks to the showing of public support and legislators like yourself, Mr. Carter, who've given us that confidence to go out there and just hold our heads up high. As you can imagine, we've been working throughout this pandemic from, I guess, whatever the official day one has been. In the Baltimore district alone, almost 150, over 150 of our employees have tested positive for the COVID-19. So as you can imagine, we're looking around just trying to protect one another. We went from fighting for our lives at the beginning of a pandemic to now fighting for our livelihoods, in a sense, with the changes that the Postmaster General has implemented. But morale, again, it's starting to go back up because, again, we're starting to see the public come out and not only voice their concern with what's going on, but understand that it's to no fault like postal workers on the ground like ourselves, like the clerks and the letter carriers that are delivering the mail, the public-facing element of the postal service. They fully understand because a lot of times they have family members who are employed by the service, or their neighbor is a postal clerk or a letter carrier. We are customers as well. We work for the postal service, and we also get mail every day to our mailboxes. So, when the news stories started coming out about different locations not receiving their mail in a timely way, the folks we represent on our work floors, they immediately came to us and they were concerned. They wanted to know what they could do to, in a sense, push back to make sure that their neighbors were receiving that timely mail on time, whether it be the prescription, medication, or that ballot. So there are folks like ourselves on the work floor. When those ballots come into the processing plants, we're making sure they're getting on those machines to be processed. And despite, the postmaster trying to, kind of restrict us from doing that with the removal of machines and whatnot, but we are, the eyes and ears on the ground who are, again, saying, look, the ballots are in. I just got off the phone with a member actually earlier, just keeping me up to date about what is going on in the processing plants with regards to the viewer's mail. And again, things are getting better, but that is because of the direct pressure that's been applied by your office, many other offices, and the public in general.
It's a very interesting observation. You're absolutely right about the public. There is such strong support for what you do every day. And it's interesting. It reminds me of many things we sort of take for granted. We for too many years, we just said, oh, well, we're going to get our mail in time. We know that. We're used to it. It's part of our life. We don't realize the challenges that have been building up. And then we didn't realize that the changes that were instituted by Mr. DeJoy would have such a dramatic impact. And then all of a sudden we say, hey, we better take action to make sure we protect the U.S. Postal Service. So it's a very good point, Courtney, and I appreciate very much you saying that. We have to make sure that we preserve this incredible institution we have known as the United States Postal Service and its dedicated workers. So Louis DeJoy is appointed the Postmaster General in June of this year. I'll give you my observation first. So I'll at least get this off my chest. I don't know of any qualifications he had to become Postmaster General other than the large contributions he made to Mr. Trump. He has a lot of political engagement, but no experience in regards to the postal system itself. So the first question is, who made the decision to appoint Mr. DeJoy? How did that come about? My civics lessons teach me that major appointments of key positions are done by the President of the United States with the advice and consent of the United States Senate. But I don't remember as a senator ever voting on Louis DeJoy. How did he become Postmaster General? Jim?
Well, Senator, under the statute that created the Postal Service in 1971, they created a board of governors, they are presidentially appointed and subject to confirmation by the Senate. So the governors who are sitting in office in this summer, right now there's 3 vacancies on the board. It's a 9-member board. The 6 sitting governors were responsible for doing a search and for making the hiring decision. So that's why you didn't get a say in it. By law, the Board of Governors makes that selection.
So in June, he's appointed. A few weeks later, he starts massive changes in the practices of the postal system. Now, let me just put this in sequence. He makes these changes in the middle of a pandemic, where we know the challenges are even greater. Think about this, the frontline workers, the challenges that they have. Also put into the equation what Jim said. This is like being in the middle of Christmas trying to change the postal system. And he doesn't just do some changes, he does many changes, some of which are extremely difficult to comprehend. I'm going to give you a few of the examples that I heard about, and then I want to get your take on what he tried to implement. I know some of these changes he has reversed himself on, but some have not. And perhaps the best way I can lead up to this is a question that was asked by Liz. Let me give you Liz's question. Liz on Facebook asks, on Saturday, September the 5th, I went to drop some postcards into the drive-through mailbox in front of the Bowie, Maine post office and found a yellow tape and big sign saying out of order on both the drive-up mailboxes with no explanation. This is not normal service change. This is an intentional, confrontational, nose-thumbing to postal customers. What happened there? Who wants to try to tell me why would you remove mailboxes or close mailboxes if you're trying to provide service to the public? I must tell you, there are not that many drop-off locations today, not like there used to be. We have a lot fewer than we had when I was growing up. Why in the middle of a pandemic would you make it more difficult for people to find a place? And what Liz is saying, she's talking about at Bowie's post office. What's going on here?
Well, I don't know the specifics of what happened in that case. Usually when a mailbox is surrounded in tape, it may be an indication that somebody vandalized it or that there might be some sort of investigation by the Postal Inspection Service if someone put something illegal in the mailbox, but it's hard to know the details of that. What's not excusable is that, somebody at the Bowie post office should have explained to the public what was going on there and made arrangements to get, other boxes put in. But just as a general matter on that issue, by and large, you're right. The Postal Service over the years has removed a lot of mailboxes across the country. They have a policy that if a mailbox doesn't get at least 20 letters a day, they either take it out or put it somewhere else where there's higher traffic. Across the country, there's still 142,000 mailboxes out there that our members visit every day to collect mail. But this has been a longstanding policy. we've kind of pushed back on it. We think we should try to make it as easy as possible for for American citizens to use their mail system. And I think this is a welcome wake-up call. And hopefully, when Congress turns to legislation next year, we can think about ways to ensure the proper coverage of the country with the collection boxes.
It was reported, I mean, so and maybe Courtney can help me here. It was reported that Mr. DeJoy ordered the removal of post boxes in significant number throughout the country in the middle of the pandemic. My understanding that was implemented, and post office boxes were actually picked up and removed from corners.
Yes, yes, and as Mr. Sauber was alluding to, there are density studies and reports that go out to kind of say, if a collection box is needed in a specific area. As he said, if it's not getting as much mail into that box, the post office may take it up, put it somewhere else where there's higher density. But as you said, Senator, the timing of this, in the middle of a pandemic, we should have as much access to those blue boxes, as we call them, as we could possibly get, because now more people are relying on the Postal Service, from that small business who may have to drop something off that collection box to be picked up, or again, that person who just wants to mail their ballot or their letter. So the timing, as Mr. Sauber stated, pretty much every year there's a removal of a collection box somewhere. But for it to happen in the middle of a pandemic, months before an election, where again, we know people are going to rely on those collection boxes, that gave us cause to pause. And there was there's typically no notification to the 4 major postal worker unions when these type of things happen. They just kind of do those things, and we'll get a call from a concerned community member or something like that, or one of your offices, and we'll find out about it then. But there has been no impetus to a lot of the decisions he's made, the things that he's changed or said he would change. He just kind of come in and said, I'm going to pull the pins in many different areas and see what works. And we think that's extremely dangerous for the infrastructure, as we know, such a large infrastructure as the Postal Service.
So it's my understanding that 671, I believe, sorting machines, mail sorting machines, were taken offline with one of the directives given by the Postmaster General. I just want to try to put this together and see if I can connect some dots. After the Postmaster General made some of these decisions, we saw in our Senate office a significant uptick in the number of constituents who were not getting the timely delivery of their mail. Was that related to the decision to remove over 600 sorting machines? We know one was removed in Baltimore.
And my understanding, Senator, is that, first of all, the Postmaster General denies he did that order. He said that's something that was decided before he got there. I don't know the facts on that, but I do know that that over time, when they take machines out, it's partly a reflection of what we discovered was that in some cases it makes sense, in some cases it doesn't. In the cases where it does make sense, it is a reality that the volume of letter mail is declined pretty significantly over the last 13 or 14 years. We used to deliver 100 billion pieces of first-class mail every year. We now deliver about 60 billion. What's changed is there's been a huge shift towards package delivery and e-commerce. So in some of the places we investigated, we found out they were taking mail machines out and putting parcel sorting machines in. And if that's the case, that's acceptable. But we also learned about other cases where, in talking to our brothers and sisters and the mail handlers in the APW, that they were taking out machines that maybe they weren't using, but should have been kept as redundancy in case another machine went down. And that was kind of reckless. And I think the APW and the mail handlers did a really good job of identifying the places where it was a really serious service threat and where it was not. I think the bigger issue that led to so much delayed mail was not the machines, but it was the changing and the rules, the operations of their transport network. And this is a policy that's still in place, is that the Postmaster General basically banned late departures of trucks. And so they were sending out trucks that didn't have all the mail for the delivery stations. So that meant that mail was left behind in the plant and it wasn't delivered. So and we found in some places around the country, they were sending our letter carriers out without their automated mail, which is the vast majority of letter mail. It's all sorted in delivery sequence at our mail processing plants. So that was really, I think that was the main reason that we had a serious deterioration in the quality of service back in July to mid-August.
Courtney, I heard from some of the employees at the Postal Service complaining that the work conditions were not sensitive to the health of the workers themselves. Overtime was being denied when overtime was needed. Having the hours, and I'm going to have Courtney respond first, but I probably want to get Jim's view on this. We heard from some letter carriers that in the middle of a summer, you want to get out as early as possible because of the heat, and that the postmaster would not allow for the normal adjustment of the day to deal with the realities of weather. Also, as far as the number of people that you're trying to minimize contact with, so that these conditions that were imposed actually jeopardize the health of the workers, in addition to being able to get the mail delivered as efficiently and timely as possible.
Absolutely, sir. And not only the health, but the safety of our folks at the local post offices. Recently reported that 2 letter carriers have been shot in different states across the country, and the reasoning behind that isn't exactly known yet. But we have people coming to local post offices, understandably frustrated because whatever that package was or that piece of mail they needed hasn't been delivered yet. And because we are the public facing side of the Postal Service, we take the brunt of that as postal workers. And we try to do what we can to try to, alleviate those frustrations with the customers and let them know that, hey, I'm just one cog in this big infrastructure that is the United States Postal Service. So we wish we could go and just retrieve your package, but there may be 100,000 other packages that we are trying to, process as well. It would be like finding a needle in the haystack. But the health of our folks, especially during the pandemic, the increased hours that some of us have had to take on, but also just the idea that a lot of our workplaces aren't conducive to social distancing. So again, we're contending with trying to protect our own safety and health, but also just preparing ourselves for any type of threat that could potentially come our way from the other side of things, or because we have people trying to undermine the service as itself as it is right now. And again, folks watch the news and they formulate their own opinion. And then again, I'm a public member. I can walk into any post office if I wanted to, and give that clerk a piece of my mind, or give that carrier a piece of my mind. So that type of safety is definitely been more at risk. And I think recently the Postal Police Association filed a lawsuit against the Postmaster General for prohibiting them, in a sense, from protecting us and protecting the mail. So as we see, health and safety have been a big issue, especially during this pandemic, but especially since this new Postmaster General has taken the helm.
Jim, did you want to respond?
Yeah, let me comment, Senator. You mentioned about the difficulty, especially in the summer months, of carriers wanting to get out earlier to deliver the mail. And this is where the tension of the pandemic comes in. Courtney mentions that in a lot of post offices, there's not a lot of space, so social distancing is very difficult. So what we did early on in the pandemic was we worked out arrangements to stagger the starting times for letter carriers in most of the delivery units in the country. And the idea would be, half of them would come in at 7:30 in the morning and half would come in at 8:30. And sometimes in the big offices, you have 3 different starting times. And the idea was to get carriers so they wouldn't be working right next to each other, cramped together. And then they would leave for their routes in waves. So in that case, that was an effort to protect the health and safety of our members. But it has, as you mentioned, there's countervailing issues that come up. And so that's why we worked very hard with the Postal Service to our health and safety folks really try to focus on heat sicknesses and getting extra breaks and making sure our folks stay well hydrated when the weather turns very severe.
Thank you. The U.S. Postal Service has financial challenges. They had financial challenges before COVID-19. We'll get into COVID-19. COVID-19 has made it more challenging, no question. And that's not unique to the United States Postal Service. Look what Congress has done to try to help the businesses of America. I'm involved directly with the small businesses, and we provided $500 billion of relief to small businesses in this country. So we recognize that. But part of the problem deals with some of the mandates that we have on how the Postal Service must do its budgeting. We had a question that was directed towards the pension benefits from a person on Facebook who said, can you reverse the decision to have the U.S. Postal Service have the money for its employee pension benefits set aside? The main reason for the U.S. Postal Service's current financial predicament, like every other agency. I don't want to get too wonky here because, but it is a major reason why the U.S. Postal Service is having financial challenges is the unique way that you are required to budget and account for your pension costs.
Right. Well, Senator, there's one minor correction. The Facebook listener is right. There is a unique mandate on it, but it's not on our pensions. It's on our retiree health benefits. And that makes it totally unique. The Postal Service is the only agency or enterprise in America that has to pre-fund future retiree health benefits. And as you know, again, I don't want to get wonky either. The budget rules are crazy when you have to try to craft legislation. In order to get a bill that didn't increase the deficit, in 2006, Congress mandated that they calculated the future retiree health benefits for the next 75 years, and they set up a 10-year schedule of payments, basically $5.5 billion a year between 2007 and 2016. And that just crushed our finances. We had massive losses, but almost all of it was for that pre-funding mandate. 88% of the losses that have occurred since 2007 as a result of that mandate. And it's really, it was put in at a time when Congress also put a cap on the postage rates. So they raised the cost dramatically, but then said you can't raise postage rates to pay for it. So that mandate is really important, that it should be repealed. And the House of Representatives voted in February, a big bipartisan group voted to repeal that mandate. And we hope at some point the Senate will take that legislation up. It's probably going to take a change in the leadership in the Senate. But we think that would be the step number one to restore some financial stability to the Postal Service.
My guest today on Facebook Live, Jim Sauber, who is the Chief of Staff for the National Association of Letter Carriers, and Courtney Jenkins, the Legislative Director of the American Postal Workers Union Local 181. Yes, we have taken up postal reform legislation in the United States Senate, and we thought we had agreements on bringing a bill forward that would have dealt with this issue, only to find out that the Republican leadership would not allow us to bring forward a postal bill at this stage. It's gotten involved, unfortunately, into presidential politics in a way. So it's also part of the COVID-19 response bills, and we're going to get to that in a few moments. Congress has been very engaged on this issue. I've joined my colleagues in legislation and in letters to Postmaster General and to our leadership in regards to dealing with the underlying financial challenges of the United States Postal Service. You basically have a couple choices. We either make these rules make sense, which can allow you to basically have current payment, which is the way it should be, or you can increase rates, but that is counterproductive because it loses your audience. Or we can give more public subsidy, and there's nothing wrong with a public subsidy. Postal Service is a universal service, is a service that we provide to America. The private sector is not interested in having a delivery through regular mail in every home in America. So let me turn, if I might, to Courtney Jenkins. in regards to how you see the future financial stability of the postal system and what we need to do.
Well, there are a number of things that can be done, and definitely postal reform is one of those things. And we've made attempts, as you said, Senator, to make that happen. Haven't been successful yet. Just to give some perspective, my postal career is a little on the younger side of things. I started in 2008, so 2 years after the 2006 pre-funding mandate. And since my career began, those processing machines that you see taken out of facilities now, when my career started, we maybe had 25 to 26 in our plant. Now we're down to 10. Um, Processing plants across the country have been closed or shuttered, local post offices as well. So, that pre-funding mandate has crippled the Postal Service in the ability to innovate, to, again, update our aging fleet of LLCs, which is desperately needed, or just, expanded services. One of the ways I see is do expansion of services like postal banking, getting more traffic into our post offices. You can go to your post office and register to vote, things like that, bringing more people to those community hubs, which is what the post office used to be and a lot of times still is. But without repealing that pre-funding mandate, as Mr. Sauber stated, we did have great bipartisan support on HR 2382, the USPS Fairness Act, which would have repealed that mandate. And of course, we got to get it through your side of things, Mr. Courtney, and we hope to be able to do that. But we know that, absent of those type of things, it'll just be kicking the can down the road. As far as the debt can, even if package rates are up now, or package volume is up, it just pushes the projection of when we'll run out of liquidity further down. It's not that we're not going to run out. It's just, okay, maybe it'll buy us a few extra months. So again, absent of that type of legislation and comprehensive reform that both sides of the aisle can agree on, I don't see much happening, because again, a lot of that PAEA restricts us with pricing. Again, and our ability to innovate in general.
Well, rarely can I point to my Facebook Live program as making such a change in policy, but evidently the federal courts must have been listening to our Facebook Live, because a decision just came down from the federal court that will block the controversial Postal Service changes that, according to the judge, slowed down mail division nationwide, calling them a politically motivated attack on the efficiency of the Postal Service before the November elections. So I know we're all trying to be balanced in the way that we present things, but I can express my views. And the timing of these changes and the manner in which they were implemented and the way they have been described by the President of the United States, coupled with the derailing of aid to the U.S. Postal Service that we thought we had on track for passage, but find now that it is controversial mainly because of presidential politics. I think all of that was too much for the federal judge to ignore the circumstances. So I just thought I would report that. So there's been a change since we've been on air in regards to this issue.
You need a breaking news Chiron, Senator.
Yeah, right. I feel like I'm in the Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer. Absolutely. So I want to get back to Congress now. We have a question from on Facebook Live, and it's pretty straightforward question from one of the listeners. How have the pandemic recent changes affected the U.S. Postal Service workforce?
Well, that's a very complicated question, because it's very strange. It was in the early days, as Courtney mentioned, our principal concern was the safety of our members, and there was a lot of fear in our workforce. There's a lot of face-to-face contact, and this is where I think people really should understand the value of unions. When you have a union, you have a voice, and you have a mechanism to address problems. When labor management relations are at its best, it's problem solving. And I think what we did between March and May to really transform the workplace to make it as safe as possible is really a tribute to the power of collective bargaining. We kind of retrofitted every post office in America with plexiglass. We spaced out the work arrangements. We got PPE. which was very hard to do. Everybody in the world was trying to get a hold of supplies of PPE, from platinum gloves and masks and hand sanitizer. But doing it together, and it was a collaborative effort every day, both at the local and national, regional and national level. There was day-to-day interaction between the unions and the Postal Service and the management. And I have to say that it was some of the more satisfying work our union has ever done, because this is where we really made a difference for our members. And we had the number of infections went way down in our crafts, and the number of hospitalizations, and unfortunately the number of deaths, we had a real spike at the beginning. So on that level, it's really been transformative of the workplace, the pandemic. On another level, it's very odd. When this thing first hit, we really had visions of what happened in 2008 when the global financial crisis, because the bottom dropped out for the Postal Service. We lost, double-digit mail volumes for several years in a row. It was like the Great Depression. In this case, we have had a fairly significant decline in mail volume that happens when you have a recession, but our package volume went up so high that when we got the third quarter results this year, the gains in package volume and revenue totally outweighed the loss of letter mail volume. So our early fears of running out of funds by the end of the year or by January 1st, it turns out that we have a bigger cushion than that. Our big concern now is, it's why we really want the Senate to get a deal on the HEROES Act, is we need a financial cushion just in case the economy deteriorates later in the year, which could happen. We're all operating in the unknown. If we have another big spike in coronavirus, it could affect the economy. And that's why it's so important to get that financial cushion to the Postal Service, just the same way that the airlines and the hotel industries and other businesses, you mentioned small businesses, the Postal Service needs that financial cushion too.
So I've been engaged in some of the negotiations on aspects of the next round of COVID relief. We're very disappointed that we haven't seen the negotiations with our leaders to bring in a package. The House, under Speaker Pelosi, passed the HEROES Act now 4 months ago. It passed it 4 months ago. We've known for the last 4 months that the CARES Act is as valuable as that was, that we needed a second round. We knew that literally back in May. And now it's in mid-September, and we still haven't acted on the next round. So state and local governments hurting, unemployment benefits have been denied to people who desperately need it. Our schools need the extra help in order to be able to function safely. We need to invest in distant learning with broadband connections. We need to deal with the healthcare pandemic to make sure that our first responders have what they need. There is help in the HEROES Act to deal with frontline workers so they get combat pay, basically, which is the right thing to do. And the list goes on and on and on as to what is in the HEROES Act: protecting our election system, dealing with small businesses, dealing with the economy. But included in that package is $25 billion for the United States Postal Service. That was passed again in mid-May. We have not seen any requests from the president for funds for the U.S. Postal Service. There has been some interest among Republicans to do something for the Postal Service, far less than the $25 billion that's in the House package. We knew that we had to do something before COVID-19, but now it seems to be more urgent. We are very thankful that it's been a double-edged sword in regards to revenues. You've lost revenues in some areas, you've gained in others, but you have the extra costs of dealing with protecting the workforce from COVID-19 that costs money. It's also an efficiency factor. You have to put that into the efficiencies to protect your workforce. That's going to also add to costs. So, Courtney, how important is it for Congress, before it adjourns for the elections, to provide financial support for the U.S. Postal Service, similar to what the House of Representatives have done in the HEROES Act.
It's extremely important, Senator Card. And I think one of the things we saw when the pandemic really began and the kind of the economy dropped off from underneath everyone is that one of the few things that was keeping the economy propped up was the Postal Service. We were making sure that a lot of businesses still could send their merchandise and their product, and you could send stuff as a consumer to those places that you are a patron at. And there are standalone bills as well outside the HEROES Act, which speak specifically to the 25 billion in emergency appropriations. One is the Protect Our Post Offices Act, and another one is the Postal Service Emergency Assistance Act, which was introduced a bipartisan piece of legislation introduced in the Senate by your colleagues, Senator Collins and Senator Feinstein. So there have been many attempts to try to, get us the support that we need so we can continue delivering for the nation once this pandemic is over, past November, past January, for generations to come. But those three bills are, basically kind of just sitting waiting on Senator Leader McConnell to bring them to the floor. And we hope that does happen before December.
So there are different legislative activities going on. There's bills that deal with some of the underlying long-term problems of the U.S. Postal Service. There's legislation to deal with the immediate needs as a result of COVID-19. There's legislation to reverse what was done by Mr. DeJoy on his so-called changes to put them legislatively on hold. So there's no mixed message in regards to that. There have been letters that that I've joined to make sure that we have adequate service. Jim mentioned small business. I serve as the ranking member on the Small Business Committee, and we can tell you that whatever changes are put in place, we have to recognize that small businesses, from a commercial point of view, don't have the same degree of flexibility or resiliency that larger companies have. So the U.S. Postal Service is literally a lifeline for small businesses. It allows them to be able to be competitive with larger companies as far as having a reliable way to conduct their business. And if that's put in jeopardy in any way, it can literally put them out of business pretty quickly. So all those issues we would like to see attention paid. And then there is the appropriation process, whether it's through a COVID-related bill or through an appropriation bill or a continuing resolution. As I think everyone here knows, the federal fiscal year ends at the end of this month. We need to pass appropriation bills before that. There is no appropriation bill that looks like it's heading towards the finish line before October 1. So it's likely we will pass a continuing resolution. Continuing resolution usually just contains last year's appropriations, but they're what's called anomalies. And there's a possibility that one of those anomalies could be additional funds for the U.S. Postal Service. So there's a lot of opportunities that are out there to try to deal with this issue. And I'm encouraged by what I hear from my guests as to the way that the postal system and its workers have really figured out a way to deal with COVID-19 and to move forward and to get the job done, and are dedicated to their mission. But we should make it easier for you, give you the tools that you need, and remove any uncertainty because of this pandemic to make sure that we don't jeopardize the safety of our workers. We don't jeopardize the businesses that depend upon the timely service that you provide. Don't jeopardize our seniors on getting the prescription medicines that they need in a timely way. And don't jeopardize the efficient running of our national election on November the 3rd. So one more question I might ask from one of our listeners on Facebook Live. When she asks, what can the public do to support the United States Postal Service and postal workers? Let's start with Courtney this time.
Well, first and foremost, thank you for that question. We appreciate it. I think continue to just, come into the post office and utilize our services. That's one of the easiest ways, as well as supporting the legislation we've discussed on this live stream. I think that calling their representatives, and most of the congressional delegation in Maryland does support our causes. And I won't call out the maybe one lone representative that may not. But, just making sure that when they see their postal workers, their letter carriers, we appreciate that nod of support. We have folks that are even putting ribbons on their mailboxes just to say save the post office. Those type of showings, they matter. They matter much more than people do realize. But again, supporting those pieces of legislation which provide us with that funding to help us get through the pandemic and recuperate any projected losses that may come about, and also repealing the pre-funding mandate. That's extremely important, and that's the best way they can support us.
Jim?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Courtney said. It really does make a difference to our members to know the public's behind us. Normally, when I answer such a question, I say call your senator, but we don't need to call Senator Hardin. He's already with us, so that's really a really benefit to the citizens of the state of Maryland. We have just a tremendous long history of support, which we really, really appreciate.
So I mentioned the federal district court judge that was in the state of Washington that came in with this preliminary injunction sought by 14 states against the U.S. Postal Service. Maryland was one of those states that joined in that issue. So that's a bit unusual to see that action by a postmaster general would be challenged as violating our Constitution or violating our laws. There are laws that prevent the intentional delay of mail. There are laws that protect our democratic institutions. So just briefly, these are constitutional protections that we have and legal protections that we have. So it's not just the responsibility of the administration and Congress, but if we don't do our job, there could well be the courts could intercede here. So, one of the things, Jim, that you brought up that I strongly agree with, and that is the importance of unions. Unions protect their workforce. That's their first and foremost. And they give a collective voice and to help run the mission of where they are. So the postal system is going to operate more efficiently if all the stakeholders have a say. You know what's happening on the ground. You know what's happening in the cages. You know what's happening in the offices. You know what's going on.
Right.
And that information needs to get to management in order to deal with these problems. If they isolate themselves from their workforce, it's not going to be as efficient. And by the way, the workers won't get their fair compensation and they won't be protected the way that they are. You have two protections: the Congress to try to do something about it if you can't get it from the executive branch, and then ultimately the courts if they step out of line. But I know that there's been, not necessarily against the postal unions, but there's been attacks against the unions generally in the public service fields by this administration. And it's one of the areas that I've taken a lead to protect our workers and their rights to collectively bargain. To me, this is one of the fundamental human rights dignity questions of our time, is to protect the rights of our workers to have their voices collectively heard.
We certainly strongly agree with that. We, especially in an organization this big, the Postal Service is just gigantic. It's got 630,000 employees. It's got more than 35,000 facilities. So a new postmaster general comes in, no matter how good he is going to need a lot of help and a lot of information. And the collective bargaining is a way to provide that information. It's absolutely a way to raise efficiency. It's sort of counterintuitive in a way, but the U.S. Postal Service is the most efficient post office in the world. Our stamp price is about a third of the average in Europe, and in some cases, people are paying $3 or $4 to mail a letter. We have just a tremendously efficient, effective national delivery network that's so valuable to the country, as we've seen during this pandemic. And investing in this infrastructure is not only good for postal workers, it's good for America because it's an absolutely essential part of our economic infrastructure. Think about it. Companies like Amazon would not exist without the Postal Service. eBay would not exist without the Postal Service. Netflix would not exist without the Postal Service. it is a job creator because it's part of our infrastructure. And we're so thankful for your support because I think you understand that. And if the public can help us educate other Americans of that basic fact, that will help us build support for postal reform.
I think what you're saying here is so important to be heard. What you do every day, not just to protect your workers, but to protect the Postal Service and Americans. You're exactly right. And I equate that to people just sort of take this for granted. One of my other responsibilities is I am the ranking Democrat on the Infrastructure Subcommittee of the Environment and Public Works Committee. And I say that about clean water. We turn on our faucets always expecting there's going to be clean water. We don't realize what goes into making sure that water is clean. And sometimes we're not prepared to make the investments to continue that service. And we pay a heavy price when we do that. Courtney, your observations as to the importance of your union and whether it is appreciated by the people of this country and by the agency where you work.
Yes, sir. So, I mean, I'm a member of a union. I've been a member of the Postal Workers Union since day one, working for the Postal Service. Senator Cardin, I can't say that I'll be sitting here talking to you and Mr. Sauber without this unionized workplace. I think one of the largest unionized workplaces left in the nation itself. To give you a sense, I represent a union member, and they give us information about what's going on with the transportation of the mail. We touch the mail, so how the mail is moving on a given day. And I just thank that member for offering that information and keeping us up to date as officers and stewards. And the member said, "Don't thank me. It's all about the customer. The customer paid for a service, and I want to ensure that it gets to that address in a timely and efficient way." So there are hundreds of thousands of members and postal workers just like that member who are extremely dedicated. Rain, sleet, hail, or snow. A pandemic to us is just another thing to add to the list. We've been showing up for countless instances of when our nation has been under distress. I think I think it was representative from the Boston area, representative, I forget his name, but he had questioned the postmaster and he said, the post office is delivered through the Revolution, through the Civil War, through two great wars and countless other events. How does one person manage to come in and mess it all up? And again, this is a question that our folks are asking us. How is it that this one guy or this one group of folks can come in and just mess everything up? But again, those dedicated postal workers that you see every day and that you may not see, they're going to push back at any opportunity they can with any type of changes that are a detriment to our neighbors that we proudly serve.
Wow, I thank you for that comment. I started by asking that you thank your workers that you represent for the frontline service. They're public servants, but they're also essential workers. They're also frontline workers. They're warriors in this war against the pandemic. They're risking their own health by showing up to work. We recognize that. And we know that there was a period of time that they didn't have the type of protective environment that they should have had, but they still showed up and they still did their work. And the risk factors are still there. And they're doing this because they believe in the mission and they know how important it is for our country, how important it is for seniors to get their medicines, how important it is for small businesses to have their products delivered, how important it is for our legal system to get documents filed. All those things they recognize, and they do it for our nation. I couldn't be prouder of the work that they do. And Jim, you are absolutely right. We have the #1 postal system in the world, the most efficient postal system in the world. It didn't just happen. It happened because of the dedication of our founding fathers to this mission, but also to the leadership that we've had over many, many years. I am convinced that we'll get back on track on the financial issues that affect the postal system. We'll get those reforms done, and we'll put you in a more stable environment for the future, so that you know that there's a safe future without compromising the service that Americans expect and should receive. That there's convenient locations for dropping off their mail, that that get service on a daily basis, that they can expect for most mail overnight processing. All those issues are things that we think are reasonable objectives, and we know that you have the capacity to increase volume in order to meet the increased needs of the people of this nation. So I want to thank you all for joining us on Facebook Live. I particularly want to thank Jim Sauber, who is the Chief of Staff for the National Association of Letter Carriers and all the letter carriers that he represents. Courtney Jenkins, the Legislative Director on the American Postal Workers Union Local 181, and all the workers that he represents. As I say, I do these Facebook Lives every once in a while on contemporary issues to try to get information out to the people of Maryland and to try to answer your questions. So thank you for joining us today on Facebook Live. Everybody stay well and drop off your mail early, particularly if it is your ballot for the November 3rd election. Stay well, everybody.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Senator.
You all.
Thanks.